A cozy kitchen in a Seattle home, soft autumn light streaming through the window. Aaliyah Carter, a 13-year-old black girl, sits at the table, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Imagine a crisp autumn morning in Seattle, where the leaves are turning fiery shades of red and gold, and the air carries a gentle chill. In a cozy kitchen in one of the city's upscale neighborhoods, 13-year-old Aaliyah Carter sits at the breakfast table, her heart racing with excitement. In front of her is a check for $6,000, a scholarship she earned through her outstanding academic performance at Evergreen Academy, one of Seattle's most prestigious private schools. Today is a big day for Aaliyah. For the first time, she's going to the bank on her own to deposit this money, a small but meaningful step toward independence that fills her with pride. Aaliyah is a remarkable girl, the kind of person who stands out not because of flashy clothes or loud confidence, but because of the quiet strength in her eyes. She's dressed in her Evergreen Academy uniform, a simple navy blazer, grey skirt and black loafers, with no designer accessories to show off her family's wealth. The only thing that stands out is a small brown leather notebook tucked into her backpack, a gift from her father. Aaliyah has a habit of jotting down her thoughts and observations, a trait her dad always encouraged. "You never know when a small detail might change everything," he'd say with a smile. At 13, Aaliyah is already wise beyond her years, with a sharp mind and a heart full of determination to make the world a better place. Across the table, her father, Dr. Malcolm Carter, sips his coffee while flipping through the financial section of the morning newspaper. A small article on page 3 mentions his recent acquisition of Pinnacle Trust Bank, a high-end bank catering to Seattle's elite. Malcolm is a towering figure in the financial world, a black man who rose from poverty to become one of the most respected financiers in the country. With his salt-and-pepper hair and a tailored suit that speaks of understated wealth, Malcolm carries himself with a quiet authority. But to Aaliyah, he's just Dad, the man who taught her the value of fairness, kindness, and hard work. "Money doesn't make a person," he often tells her. "It's how you treat others that defines who you are." The Carter family lives in a beautiful but modest home in one of Seattle's most prestigious neighborhoods. Their house is elegant yet understated, a reflection of Malcolm's philosophy that true wealth lies in investing in people, not possessions. As a child growing up in a struggling neighborhood, Malcolm faced countless challenges, but he turned those hardships into fuel for success. Now, as the new owner of Pinnacle Trust Bank, he's determined to make the financial world more equitable, ensuring that everyone, regardless of race or background, has access to the opportunities they deserve. But the bank's employees don't yet know about the change in ownership, a detail that will soon turn their world upside down. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" Malcolm asks, folding the newspaper and looking at Aaliyah with a proud smile. Aaliyah shakes her head, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'm 13 now, Dad. I need to learn to do these things on my own." Malcolm's smile widens, his eyes shining with trust. He knows his daughter is capable of handling herself, but as any parent would, he can't help but worry. "All right, sweetheart," he says, standing up to give her a warm hug. "But be home soon, okay? I'll be waiting for you." Aaliyah grabs her backpack, carefully tucking the check, her scholarship letter, and her school ID into a small folder. As she steps outside, the cool Seattle air brushes against her cheeks and she feels a surge of excitement. She has no idea that this simple trip to the bank is about to become the most challenging and transformative day of her young life. Pinnacle Trust Bank sits on Pine Street, one of Seattle's busiest and most upscale areas, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and luxury boutiques. The bank's glass facade gleams under the autumn sun, its marble floors and walnut-paneled walls exuding wealth and exclusivity. Inside, the atmosphere is one of polished perfection. Promotional posters on the walls feature smiling white families, and the customer service area is divided into two distinct sections. One is for priority clients with plush leather chairs, complimentary coffee, and personalized service. The other is for regular customers, with a long row of plastic chairs and no amenities to speak of. This is a place where Seattle's elite come to manage their millions. But beneath the glossy surface lies a darker truth, a culture of discrimination that favors the wealthy and the white while making others feel unwelcome. At the heart of this culture is Margaret Ellison, the branch manager. Margaret is a middle-aged woman with a meticulously curated appearance. Her designer blazer is perfectly pressed, her gold watch glints on her wrist, and her blonde hair is styled without a single strand out of place. She's been with Pinnacle Trust Bank for over 15 years, and she takes pride in maintaining standards. To Margaret, that means catering to a specific clientele, white, wealthy and well-connected, while subtly discouraging anyone who doesn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. That morning she was overheard telling a new employee, "We have to be selective about who feels comfortable here. Not everyone belongs in a place like this." Margaret has no idea that the bank's new owner, Dr. Malcolm Carter, has a very different vision for its future. As Aaliyah pushes open the heavy glass doors of Pinnacle Trust Bank, her heart beats a little faster. She clutches her folder tightly, mentally rehearsing the words she's prepared. "I'd like to deposit this scholarship check into my account, please." It's a simple transaction, one that happens hundreds of times a day in banks across the country. But Aaliyah is about to learn that for a 13-year-old black girl in a place like this, nothing is ever simple. What happens next will not only change her life, but will shake the very foundations of Pinnacle Trust Bank. If you believe in justice and want to see a story of instant karma unfold, type "justice" in the comments below and hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what's coming.
Inside Pinnacle Trust Bank, Aaliyah steps into the grand lobby, her small figure dwarfed by the towering marble columns. The moment Aaliyah Carter steps into Pinnacle Trust Bank, she feels a mix of awe and nervousness. The lobby is breathtaking, with its polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers overhead. The air smells faintly of expensive cologne and fresh flowers, and the sound of quiet conversations fills the space. Aaliyah adjusts her backpack, her fingers brushing against the folder containing her $6,000 scholarship check. She takes a deep breath, reminding herself of the words she's rehearsed. "I'd like to deposit this scholarship check into my account, please." It's a simple request, but for a 13-year-old doing this on her own for the first time, it feels like a big moment. Aaliyah joins the line at the teller counter, her eyes scanning the room. She notices the stark contrast between the two customer service areas. The priority section with its leather chairs and smiling staff, and the regular section where a few people sit on hard plastic chairs, waiting patiently. Most of the customers in the priority area are white and dressed in expensive clothes, while the regular line includes a more diverse group, people of color, elderly folks, and a few young adults. Aaliyah doesn't think much of it at first. She's just focused on getting her deposit done and heading home to tell her dad about her accomplishment. When it's finally her turn, Aaliyah steps up to the teller window with a polite smile. The teller, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun and a name tag reading Linda, looks at Aaliyah with a neutral expression. Aaliyah slides her folder across the counter, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Hi, I'd like to deposit this scholarship check into my account, please," she says, opening the folder to reveal the $6,000 check, her scholarship letter, and her school ID. Linda's eyes widen slightly at the amount on the check, then narrow as she looks Aaliyah up and down. The 13-year-old in a school uniform doesn't seem to match the large sum of money in her hand. "This is a pretty big check for someone your age," Linda says, her tone laced with suspicion. She holds the check up to the light, examining it as if expecting to find signs of forgery. "Where did you get this?" Aaliyah feels a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she keeps her voice calm. "It's my academic scholarship," she explains. "I won it for my grades at Evergreen Academy. I have the award letter right here if you need to see it." She points to the letter in the folder, which bears the official letterhead of the academy and a signature from the principal. But Linda doesn't even glance at the letter. Instead, she presses a button under her desk, and within moments, Margaret Ellison, the branch manager, appears behind the counter. Margaret is a striking figure in her tailored blazer and gold watch, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She takes the check from Linda without acknowledging Aaliyah, speaking to the teller as if the girl isn't even there. "Another one of these," Margaret sighs, shaking her head. "We've had issues with fraudulent checks lately, especially from people like her." The emphasis on people like her is unmistakable, and Aaliyah feels a knot form in her stomach. She knows exactly what Margaret means. "It's my academic scholarship," Aaliyah repeats, her voice a little louder this time. She pulls out the award letter and holds it up. "I have all the documentation right here." Margaret finally looks at Aaliyah, her blue eyes cold and calculating. She snatches the letter from Aaliyah's hand, barely glancing at it before tossing it back into the folder. "I'll be the judge of what this is," she snaps. "I need to see some identification." Aaliyah hands over her school ID and bank card, expecting Margaret to return them after a quick check. But instead, Margaret collects all of Aaliyah's documents, her ID, the check, the letter, into the folder and tucks it under her arm. "We'll need to hold these for verification," she says, her tone dripping with condescension. "This kind of money doesn't just show up with someone like you." Aaliyah's heart sinks. "But I need those to deposit my check," she says, trying to keep her voice steady. Margaret leans over the counter, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "How exactly did someone like you get this scholarship?" she asks, her words sharp and cutting. "Did you actually earn it, or did you forge it? I'm sure there are all sorts of special programs these days, lowered standards, quotas to fill." The blatant racism in her words hits Aaliyah like a slap, but she refuses to let Margaret see her crumble. "I maintained a perfect GPA and scored in the 99th percentile on the National Academic Assessment," Aaliyah says firmly. "The scholarship is merit-based." Margaret lets out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Well, I run this branch and I decide who gets service here," she says, tapping her manicured fingernail on the counter for emphasis. "And something doesn't feel right about you." By now the bank has grown quieter, with other customers pretending not to listen but clearly watching the scene unfold. Aaliyah feels their eyes on her, the weight of their judgment adding to the humiliation. "I just want to deposit my check like anyone else," she says, her voice trembling slightly but still steady. Margaret's expression hardens. "This check doesn't even look real," she sneers. "Money like this has a way of disappearing with a certain type of person." The implication is clear, and Aaliyah feels a surge of anger mixed with shame. Before she can respond, Margaret turns to the security guard standing nearby. "Mr. Tate, please escort this girl away from the counter," she orders. "She's causing a disturbance." The guard, a large man with a stern face, steps forward, his hand resting on the baton at his side. "Let's go now," he says gruffly, grabbing Aaliyah's arm with a firm grip. Aaliyah tries to protest. "But I just need to deposit my check. You have all my ID and documents. I can't leave without them." Margaret's smile is chilling. "Oh, that's right. We have everything, don't we?" she says, her voice dripping with malice. "So you'll just have to wait until we're done. It could be hours. It could be longer." The guard marches Aaliyah across the marble floor to a corner near the entrance, far from the teller counter and the exit. "Stand here and don't move until we say so," he orders, positioning her where everyone can see her, but she's isolated from the rest of the bank. Aaliyah's face burns with humiliation as wealthy customers whisper and stare, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others looking away uncomfortably. Margaret watches the scene with a satisfied smirk, her arms crossed as if she's just solved a major problem. As Aaliyah stands in the corner, her legs already starting to ache, she searches through her backpack, hoping to find her phone to call her dad. But then her heart sinks. She remembers leaving it in her locker during a study group session at school. Panic rises in her chest. Her dad is expecting her home soon, and she has no way to let him know what's happening. She looks at the guard, her voice small but desperate. "Please, can I use a phone? My dad is expecting me, and you have all my documents." The guard doesn't even turn his head. "Stay put and be quiet," he snaps. "We'll get to you when we get to you, if we ever do." Aaliyah's eyes fill with tears, but she blinks them back, refusing to let Margaret or anyone else see her break. She clutches her small leather notebook, the one thing she still has, and makes a silent promise to herself. She'll get through this, no matter what. But what she doesn't know is that this humiliating moment is just the beginning. In the hours to come, Aaliyah will uncover a dark secret that will change everything. Not just for her, but for the entire bank.
Aaliyah stands in the corner of Pinnacle Trust Bank, her small notebook in hand, observing everything around her. For the next 3.5 hours, Aaliyah Carter stands in the corner of Pinnacle Trust Bank, her legs aching and her heart heavy with humiliation. The wall clock above the teller counter becomes her tormentor, each tick of the second hand stretching into an eternity. She's been forced to stand here, isolated and on display, while the bank continues its business around her. Wealthy customers come and go, their designer shoes clicking against the marble floor, their voices low and confident as they're ushered into the priority client area. Aaliyah feels their eyes on her, some curious, some judgmental, others simply indifferent. But she refuses to let the shame break her. Instead, she does what she's always done. She observes and she writes. Aaliyah opens her small leather notebook, her pen moving quickly across the page as she documents everything she sees. She notes the time, the people, and the interactions, her sharp mind cataloguing every detail. At first, she's just trying to distract herself from the pain in her legs and the sting of Margaret Ellison's cruel words. But as the minutes turn into hours, Aaliyah begins to notice a pattern of blatant bias that makes her blood boil. At 12:15 p.m., a middle-aged white couple approaches the teller counter with a modest check to deposit. Margaret Ellison materializes almost instantly, her face lighting up with a warm smile that Aaliyah has never seen directed at her. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, what a pleasure to see you again," Margaret says, her voice dripping with charm. "Please, let me take you to our VIP room." The couple's transaction slip, visible from Aaliyah's position, shows a deposit of just $2,000, far less than Aaliyah's $6,000 scholarship check. Yet Margaret personally escorts them through a frosted glass door marked Priority Clients, where Aaliyah glimpses leather chairs, a coffee service, and even a champagne bucket with flutes on a silver tray. When Margaret emerges a few minutes later, she's carrying an empty coffee cup as if she's just served them herself. Aaliyah writes in her notebook, 12:15 p.m., white couple, $2,000 deposit, immediately taken to VIP room with coffee and champagne. No verification needed. She looks down at her own empty hands, her check, Idaho, and scholarship letter still in Margaret's possession, and feels a surge of anger. Why was she treated like a criminal, while this couple was treated like royalty? The pattern continues. At 12:30 p.m., a white teenager, no older than 15, approaches the new accounts desk, asking to open his first checking account. Margaret appears again, her smile as bright as ever. "Of course we can help you with that," she says warmly. "No need to bring your parents in. We can get everything set up for you right away." "Nah." Aaliyah's eyes drift to a policy poster on the wall directly behind Margaret. New accounts for minors require parent-guardian presence and signature. The hypocrisy is so blatant that Aaliyah flips to a new page in her notebook, writing in large block letters at the top, evidence of discrimination. She notes 12:30 p.m. white teenage boy, 15 years old, allowed to open account without parents against bank policy. At 12:45 p.m., an elderly black man approaches Margaret's desk, a folder of papers neatly arranged in front of him. He's been waiting patiently for over an hour, but Margaret doesn't even glance at him. Instead, she focuses on a young white woman who has just completed a transaction. "Miss Whitaker, please allow me to walk you out," Margaret says, taking the woman's deposit envelope and small purse as if they're heavy burdens. She guides the woman to the door with a solicitous hand on her elbow, completely ignoring the elderly man. He shifts uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at his watch and sighing quietly. Aaliyah writes, 12:45 p.m. Elderly black man ignored for over an hour while white woman immediately escorted out with extra attention. The most jarring moment comes at 1 p.m. when a young white boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, breaks free from his mother's grasp and starts running circles around the lobby furniture, laughing loudly. His mother, busy at the teller counter, looks flustered but doesn't stop him. The disruption is far more noticeable than anything Aaliyah has done. Yet Margaret approaches with a warm smile. She crouches down to the boy's level, her eyes twinkling with indulgence. "What an energetic young man you are," she says, then turns to the mother. "Would he like a lollipop? A special treat for our special customers." Aaliyah's pen freezes on the page as she recalls Margaret's harsh words to her. "Something doesn't feel right about you," she writes. 1 p.m. White boy 7, 8 years old, causes disruption but is given a lollipop and praised. "I was called a fraud for trying to deposit my scholarship." The discriminatory clockwork ticks on. At 1:15 p.m., a Latino couple approaches Margaret's desk with questions about a transaction. Without even checking their account, Margaret responds with practiced regret. "I'm afraid the system is running slow today. It might take several days for your transaction to process." 5 minutes later, an older white man in a golf shirt approaches with a similar inquiry. Margaret's demeanor changes instantly. "Let me expedite this for you, Mr. Garrison," she says brightly. "We don't want to waste your valuable time. I can process this right now as a priority transaction." Aaliyah's pen moves faster. 1:20 p.m. Latino couple told transaction will take days. White man, same request processed immediately. The final straw comes at 1:30 p. when a well-dressed black family, a father in business casual, a mother in a professional dress, approaches Margaret's desk with a mortgage application. "We'd like to discuss home loan options," the father says, his voice calm but firm. "We've been pre-approved at another bank, but we prefer to work with a local institution." Margaret barely glances at their paperwork before responding, "You might find our downtown branch more suitable for your needs. They specialize in diverse lending programs for people like you." The family exchanges a knowing look, the kind that speaks volumes about having encountered this treatment before. They collect their documents and leave, their shoulders slumped with disappointment. Aaliyah writes, 1:30 p.m. black family with mortgage application redirected to another branch with diverse programs. Clear discrimination. Aaliyah's legs ache, and the humiliation has settled into a cold knot in her stomach, but something else has taken root alongside it, a quiet determination. She's no longer just a victim standing in a corner. She's a witness documenting every injustice she sees. But what happens next takes her observations to a whole new level. At 1:52 p.m., Aaliyah notices Margaret's demeanor change. The branch manager, who has been so deliberately cruel, suddenly seems distracted, checking her gold watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Margaret ducks into the restroom, emerging moments later with refreshed makeup and not a hair out of place. She straightens her blazer, adjusts her necklace, and smooths invisible wrinkles from her skirt. Aaliyah watches, her curiosity piqued. Margaret is preparing for someone important. At precisely 1:55 p.m., the receptionist's desk phone rings. After a brief exchange, the receptionist gives Margaret a subtle nod. Margaret's body tenses, then relaxes into a practiced smile as she walks briskly toward her private office at the far end of the branch. In her haste, she fails to completely close the door, leaving a 3-inch gap, narrow enough to seem closed to casual observers, but wide enough for a determined eye to see through. Aaliyah, still standing in her corner, shifts slightly to get a better view, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. Through the gap in the doorway, Aaliyah sees Margaret lead a man into her office, a tall, impeccably dressed man in a charcoal suit that screams custom tailoring. "Are you sure no one saw me come in?" the man asks, glancing toward the not-quite-closed door. He rises briefly to check that the office blinds are fully drawn. "The side entrance worked as planned," Margaret replies. "Yes, Mr. Langston, everything is arranged exactly as we discussed. No one knows you're here." The name registers immediately in Aaliyah's mind. Edward Langston. She's heard her father mention him before, always in a tone of disdain. Edward Langston is the CEO of Summit Financial, one of Pinnacle Trust Bank's main competitors. Aaliyah's pen moves faster as she writes, 1:55 p.m. Margaret meets with Edward Langston, CEO of Summit Financial, in private office. Entered through side door. Margaret reaches into her desk drawer and pulls out a thick manila folder with a bold red stamp across its cover. Confidential Carter acquisition. Aaliyah's breath catches in her throat. Her family name is on that folder. Margaret slides the folder across the desk with a reverence that suggests she's delivering something sacred. "This has everything you asked for," she says, her voice trembling with excitement. "Client lists, asset valuations, detailed accounts of high-net-worth customers, lending portfolios, even proprietary investment strategies they're planning to implement post-acquisition." Edward opens the folder, his eyes widening with satisfaction as he scans the contents. "Excellent work, Margaret," he says, his fingers tracing the lines of financial spreadsheets. "This is exactly what I needed." Margaret practically glows with pride. "You'll be handsomely paid for this," Edward continues. "This period is the perfect time to move. With the bank's attention focused on the acquisition, they'll never see us coming. Pinnacle Trust will be out of business soon." Margaret nods eagerly. "I've already flagged the high-value clients who might be receptive to moving their accounts," she says, tapping a section of the documents. "It's all here. Complete implementation schedule, regulatory approval, staffing changes, everything. He has no idea what's coming." Aaliyah presses her hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp, her eyes wide with shock. The casual way they discuss betraying her father's business makes her stomach churn. Without thinking, she writes, "Margaret gave Edward Langston confidential documents about Dad's acquisition. They're planning to steal clients and destroy Pinnacle Trust." Her mind races with the implications. This isn't just about her terrible treatment anymore. Margaret Ellison is actively engaged in corporate betrayal against her father's company while simultaneously implementing discriminatory practices. The two threads are intertwined. Margaret is selecting which clients to poach, preparing to move them to Summit Financial under Edward Langston. By the time Edward prepares to leave through the side exit, Aaliyah has filled 3 pages with evidence that could shake Pinnacle Trust Bank to its foundations, but she doesn't realize that her careful note-taking has caught the attention of someone else. Sophie Nguyen, a young Asian-American teller, has been watching Aaliyah's focused writing with growing curiosity, and as Margaret escorts Edward out, Sophie makes a decision that will change everything. Aaliyah stands in the corner, her notebook clutched tightly, as Sophie Nguyen approaches her. Aaliyah Carter has been standing in the corner of Pinnacle Trust Bank for 3.5 hours, her legs trembling from the strain and her heart heavy with the weight of everything she's witnessed. The wall clock now reads 3:15 p.m., and the humiliation of being treated like a criminal has settled into a dull ache in her chest. But Aaliyah's mind remains sharp, her small leather notebook filled with pages of meticulous notes, evidence of Margaret Ellison's discriminatory behaviour and the shocking conspiracy she uncovered between Margaret and Edward Langston. Aaliyah knows she has to tell her dad, but with her phone left at school and her documents still in Margaret's possession, she feels trapped and powerless. Aaliyah tries to catch the security guard's attention, her voice small but desperate. "Excuse me, sir," she says, her throat dry from hours of silence. "Could I please use a phone? My dad is expecting me home, and you have all my documents. I can't leave without them." The guard, a burly man named Mr. Tate, doesn't even turn his head. "Stay put and be quiet," he snaps, his tone harsh and unyielding. "We'll get to you when we get to you, if we ever do." Aaliyah's eyes sting with tears, but she blinks them back, refusing to let Margaret or the guard see her break. She glances at the clock again, her anxiety mounting. Her dad, Dr. Malcolm Carter, must be worried by now. She was supposed to be home hours ago. Across the bank floor, Sophie Nguyen, a young Asian-American teller, has been watching Aaliyah with growing unease. Sophie is in her early 20s, with a kind face and a quiet demeanour that often goes unnoticed in the fast-paced environment of Pinnacle Trust Bank. She's been working here for just over a year, and in that time she's seen Margaret's discriminatory behaviour more times than she can count. Subtle slights against customers of colour, preferential treatment for white clients, and a general air of superiority that makes Sophie's stomach turn. But what's happening to Aaliyah is on a whole new level, forcing a 13-year-old girl to stand in a corner for hours, treating her like a criminal for trying to deposit a scholarship check. It's too much for Sophie to ignore. Sophie glances at the clock. 3:15 p.m., the start of her scheduled break. She removes her name badge and places it in her drawer, her hands trembling slightly. She knows what she's about to do could cost her job, but her conscience won't let her stand by any longer. Sophie picks up a small stack of deposit slips and a cleaning cloth, pretending to tidy up as she makes her way across the floor. Margaret is occupied with a wealthy client in her office, and the security guard has positioned himself near the entrance, scrolling through his phone. Sophie moves with casual purpose, straightening brochures and wiping down countertops, her heart pounding as she approaches Aaliyah's corner. When she reaches Aaliyah, Sophie keeps her back to the security cameras, bending down to pick up a fallen pen. She whispers without looking directly at the girl, her voice barely audible. "Are you okay? You've been standing here for hours." The unexpected kindness nearly breaks Aaliyah's composure. After hours of being treated as less than human, the simple acknowledgement of her situation sends a wave of emotion through her. "They took my documents," Aaliyah whispers back, her voice cracking. "I can't leave without them, and I need to call my dad. I forgot my phone at school." Sophie glances over her shoulder, checking that Margaret is still occupied. With trembling fingers, she slips her personal cell phone from her pocket, concealing it between the cleaning cloth and deposit slips. "I could lose my job for this," she murmurs, pressing the phone into Aaliyah's hand. "But this isn't right. What they're doing to you isn't right. I've watched it happen to others, but never this bad." Aaliyah's eyes widen in disbelief at the unexpected lifeline. "Thank you so much," she whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to do. I've been standing here for so long." "Be quick," Sophie cautions, her eyes darting toward Margaret's office. "Margaret checks the security cameras sometimes. I'll try to block their view of you, but you only have a few minutes." With that, Sophie positions herself strategically between Aaliyah and the nearest camera, pretending to reorganize a nearby brochure display. Her small act of rebellion carries significant risk. Bank employees are strictly forbidden from lending personal devices to customers, especially those under security supervision. Aaliyah's hands shake as she dials her dad's number, shielding the phone with her body and notebook. The phone rings twice before Dr. Malcolm Carter answers, his deep, reassuring voice coming through the line. "Hello?" Aaliyah's whisper is thick with unshed tears. "Dad, it's me. I'm at the bank and they won't let me deposit my check. They took my scholarship check and made me stand in a corner for hours. They have my ID, my documents, everything. I can't leave without them. The manager has been horrible, saying awful things." Malcolm's voice takes on a steely calm, the kind Aaliyah recognizes from rare moments when his anger runs too deep for shouting. "Aaliyah, what's happening? You should have been home hours ago." The words tumble out of Aaliyah in a rushed whisper. "They think I'm a fraud. Because of how I look. The manager, Margaret, said I don't belong here. And Dad, there's more. I saw her meeting with someone named Edward Langston. She gave him a folder marked Confidential, Carter Acquisition. They were talking about you and the bank acquisition. She's giving him client lists and timelines. They're planning something against your company." There's a profound silence on the other end of the line. "Did you say Edward Langston?" Malcolm finally asks, his voice unnaturally controlled. "Are you absolutely certain that was his name?" Aaliyah nods, even though her dad can't see her. "Yes, they were in her office. She gave him a folder with your name on it. They said they're going to steal your clients and make Pinnacle Trust go out of business." Aaliyah can hear her dad's measured breathing, the careful inhales and exhales he uses to maintain his composure in critical situations. "Stay calm, Aaliyah," he says. "I'm on my way, but don't let them know who I am just yet. This is much bigger than we thought. My assistant, Miss Evelyn Brooks, will be there first. She's only 10 minutes away." Aaliyah glances nervously toward Margaret's office, her voice barely audible. "They've been treating people differently based on race, Dad. I've been writing everything down." Malcolm's voice softens, a note of pride cutting through his anger. "Of course you have," he says. "That's my girl. Keep documenting everything. This kind of evidence is exactly what we need." Aaliyah's fear bubbles to the surface. "I'm scared, Dad," she admits, her voice trembling. "I know, sweetheart," Malcolm replies, his tone gentle but firm. "But I'm proud of you for handling this with such maturity. You're stronger than you know." The sounds of movement come through the phone. Car keys jangling, a door opening. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Miss Brooks will arrive much sooner. Just hold on a little longer." As the call ends, Sophie appears at Aaliyah's side, gently retrieving her phone. "Everything okay?" she asks, her voice tinged with worry. Aaliyah nods, a small spark of hope igniting in her chest. "Help is coming," she whispers. "Thank you." Sophie gives her a quick, reassuring nod before returning to her station, her posture noticeably tenser than before. Aaliyah clutches her notebook, her resolve strengthening. She may be a 13-year-old girl standing in a corner, but she's no longer powerless. Her dad is coming, and with him, justice is on its way. The glass doors of Pinnacle Trust Bank swing open as Miss Evelyn Brooks enters, followed by the dramatic arrival of Dr. Malcolm Carter. The next 17 minutes pass with excruciating slowness for Aaliyah Carter. She stands in her designated corner of Pinnacle Trust Bank, her legs aching and her small notebook clutched tightly in her hands. The pages are filled with hours of careful documentation, evidence of Margaret Ellison's discriminatory behavior and the shocking conspiracy she uncovered between Margaret and Edward Langston, the CEO of Summit Financial. Aaliyah's heart races with a mix of fear and anticipation. Her dad, Dr. Malcolm Carter, is on his way, and his assistant, Miss Evelyn Brooks, will arrive any moment. Aaliyah knows that everything is about to change. At precisely 3:42 p.m., the bank's glass doors swing open with purpose. A tall woman in a tailored charcoal suit strides in, her natural hair styled in a short professional cut. She carries a sleek leather portfolio and scans the bank with a calculating gaze. This is Miss Evelyn Brooks, Dr. Carter's assistant, a woman accustomed to commanding rooms with her efficiency and authority. Margaret Ellison emerges from her office immediately, her predatory instinct for wealthy potential clients overriding whatever task she was working on. She approaches Evelyn with a practiced smile, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Welcome to Pinnacle Trust Bank," she says. "I'm Margaret Ellison, the branch manager. How may I assist you today?" Evelyn doesn't return the smile. "I'm here regarding an emergency situation requiring immediate attention," she says, her voice crisp and professional. Before Margaret can respond, her cell phone begins to ring. She glances at it with annoyance, then surprise as she recognizes the number. "Excuse me one moment," she says to Evelyn, answering the call. "This is, Margaret Ellison." Whatever is said on the other end causes Margaret's expression to shift from confidence to confusion. "Yes, sir, I understand," she says, her free hand nervously adjusting her necklace. "No, I wasn't aware of any—" "Yes, all protocols were followed." Her voice trails off as she listens, her composure beginning to crack. She barely ends the call when her phone rings again, a different number this time. Margaret declines it, but it immediately rings again, the relentless buzzing adding to her growing unease. "I apologize for the interruption," Margaret says to Evelyn, her voice slightly higher than before. "How can I help with this emergency situation?" Evelyn's expression remains impassive. "I need to speak with Aaliyah Carter right away," she says, her tone making it clear this is not a request. Margaret's brow furrows. "Who?" "Oh, the girl with the suspicious check," she says, gesturing dismissively toward Aaliyah's corner. "We're still verifying her documentation. Standard procedure for potential fraud." Evelyn's eyes narrow. "The daughter of Dr. Malcolm Carter," she clarifies, her words carrying significant weight. Margaret's reaction is subtle but unmistakable. A slight widening of her eyes, a momentary freeze in her practiced smile. "Carter," she repeats, the colour beginning to drain from her face as the pieces click into place. The scholarship check with the Carter name, the documents she so casually confiscated, the young girl she humiliated for hours, and the folder she handed to Edward Langston, it all comes crashing down on her. We've been following standard protocols for unusual transactions," Margaret stammers, her earlier confidence evaporating. "There was no indication that she was affiliated with anyone of significance. I didn't know who she was." Evelyn's expression hardens. "So, you treat all young customers this way unless they're affiliated with someone of significance?" she asks, her question damning in its implications. Without waiting for a response, she walks directly toward Aaliyah. "Miss Carter," she says, her professional demeanour softening slightly, "I apologize for this inexcusable situation. Your father is on his way. He asked me to make sure you're all right." Aaliyah nods, relief washing over her face. "I'm okay," she says, her voice quiet but steady. "Just tired of standing." "Where are Miss Carter's documents?" Evelyn asks, turning back to Margaret, who has followed behind, increasingly flustered. "I'm sorry, there seems to have been a misunderstanding," Margaret begins, her voice taking on a placating tone. "We take fraud prevention very seriously here, and certain procedures must be followed." Evelyn cuts her off. "Her documents," she repeats, her tone leaving no room for argument. Margaret hurries to her office, returning moments later with Aaliyah's folder containing her ID, scholarship check and award letter. She extends them toward Aaliyah with a completely transformed demeanour. "If we had known she was related to someone important, we certainly would have expedited the verification process," she says, her smile strained and artificial. Evelyn's expression remains cold. "So your standard of service depends on family connections?" she asks. "Is that the official policy of Pinnacle Trust Bank?" Before Margaret can formulate a response, Evelyn continues, "We'll need complete access to today's security recordings from all cameras in this branch." Margaret's eyes widen. "I don't think that's necessary," she starts, but Evelyn interrupts. "This is a formal investigation matter, and any attempt to modify evidence will carry additional consequences." Margaret's phone continues its relentless buzzing as regional executives try desperately to reach her, but she's too overwhelmed to answer. At 4 p.m., the atmosphere in the bank shifts dramatically. A sleek, black Mercedes S-Class with darkened windows glides to a stop directly in front of the bank's main entrance, not in the parking lot, but right at the curb, the kind of arrival that announces someone too important to walk the extra 20 feet. The uniformed driver emerges, circling to open the rear passenger door with practiced precision. A young bank associate whispers, abandoning his closing duties to stare through the glass doors. "Is that—" Margaret, who had been mid-sentence explaining verification procedures to an increasingly unimpressed Evelyn, falls silent as she follows the employee's gaze. The colour that had only partially returned to her face drains completely away. More vehicles arrive, a procession of luxury cars that circle like predators. From one emerges Lydia Harper, the regional director Margaret reports to, her expression grim and purposeful. From others, step board members in tailored suits, their presence at a local branch unprecedented. Within moments, 7 executives stand outside the bank, all focused on the man emerging from the first car. Dr. Malcolm Carter steps out, 6'2", with broad shoulders and the deliberate movements of someone who knows his own power. His tailored navy suit speaks of wealth that requires no advertisement, his salt-and-pepper hair perfectly groomed, his gaze sharply focused. The entire bank falls silent, tellers freeze mid-count, customers heading for the exit step back, and even the security guard who tormented Aaliyah seems to shrink. Malcolm's eyes find Aaliyah immediately, still standing in her corner after nearly 4 hours. A controlled flash of rage crosses his face, quickly tempered by concern for his daughter. He walks directly to her, his long strides eating the distance. "Are you all right?" he asks, his deep voice soft enough that only Aaliyah can hear. "I'm okay, Dad," she responds, her exhaustion evident but her eyes clear. "I have something important to show you." She holds up her notebook filled with hours of careful documentation. Pride briefly overshadows the concern in Malcolm's expression before he turns to face Margaret Ellison. When he speaks, his voice is perfectly modulated, not raised, not threatening, but carrying the unmistakable gravity of absolute authority. "I believe you've been holding my daughter against her will," he states, each word precisely placed. By now, Lydia Harper and the other executives have entered the bank, their faces a mix of mortification and urgency. Lydia approaches Malcolm, her voice professionally controlled but strained. "Dr. Carter, I can't express how deeply sorry we are for this situation," she begins. "I was only informed minutes ago, and I assure you this is not reflective of our—" "Miss Harper, I can explain," Margaret interrupts, stepping forward with desperate energy. "There was a protocol!" Lydia silences her with a single raised hand, not even turning to acknowledge her. Margaret's interruption dies in her throat. Malcolm surveys the assembled staff and remaining customers, his voice carrying effortlessly throughout the space. "For those who don't know," he says, "I recently acquired majority shares in Pinnacle Trust Bank. That makes me your highest authority." Employees exchange shocked glances, the weight of his words sinking in. "But I came here today not as a bank owner, but as a father," he continues, his gaze returning to Margaret. "What I found is far worse than I could have imagined." Margaret physically stumbles backward, reaching for the counter to steady herself. The realization of what she's done, and who she's done it to, hits her with physical force. "Oh my God," she whispers, barely audible, her face turning completely pale. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know she was your daughter," she says, her voice trembling with fear. Malcolm's expression doesn't soften. "The boardroom," he states, not a request, but a command. "Now!" Within minutes, the bank's conference room is transformed into an impromptu tribunal. Board members file in silently, followed by Lydia Harper and the other executives. Margaret is escorted in by security, the same guard who enforced her cruelty now ensuring her presence for accountability. The most shocking addition comes when Edward Langston is brought in through a side entrance, having been intercepted leaving a nearby restaurant by bank security. Against one wall, a large screen displays security footage from throughout the day, the timestamp rolling forward to show Aaliyah's arrival, her polite interaction with the teller, and then nearly 4 hours of forced standing in the corner. The footage is damning enough, but when the cameras show Margaret's differential treatment of customers based on race, several board members shake their heads in visible disgust. Aaliyah stands before them, notebook in hand, her exhaustion evident, but her voice clear and precise as she reads from her detailed notes. "I documented everything I saw while I was forced to stand there," she explains, flipping through pages filled with timestamps, descriptions, and direct quotes. "At 1:52 p.m. I saw Miss Ellison meeting with this man, Edward Langston." She gestures toward the competitor who sits stone-faced at the end of the table. She gave him a folder clearly marked Confidential Carter Acquisition and discussed transferring high-value clients to his bank. Malcolm's expression remains impassive, but his eyes burn with controlled fury. "Mr. Langston is an executive at Summit Financial, our direct competitor," he informs the board, most of whom are already aware. "The documents Miss Ellison provided contain confidential merger information, acquisition timelines, and client data." He pauses, letting the weight of his words settle. "This is not just discrimination, this is corporate espionage." Margaret's phone is collected by security and connected to the presentation screen, displaying a series of text messages between her and Edward. One from Edward reads, "Have list of high-value clients ready for transfer." The evidence mounts relentlessly, each piece more damning than the last. Through it all, Margaret's attempts at explanation grow increasingly desperate and incoherent. "I was only following protocols," she insists, her voice thin and shaky. "I didn't know who she was." Edward, meanwhile, tries to deflect blame. I was simply exploring business opportunities, he says, his tone cold but unconvincing. Malcolm's gaze shifts between them, his voice steady but cutting. You humiliated my daughter for hours because of her race, he says to Margaret. And you sold confidential information to a competitor, he adds, turning to Edward. Is that also standard protocol at Pinnacle Trust Bank? The room falls silent, the weight of the evidence suffocating. Margaret's career, her reputation, and her freedom are slipping away before her eyes, and there's nothing she can do to stop it. Edward's carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbles as the reality of his actions sets in. Aaliyah, standing beside her father, feels a mix of relief and vindication. The truth is out and justice is finally here. Margaret and Edward face the consequences of their actions, while Pinnacle Trust Bank undergoes a transformation. The conference room at Pinnacle Trust Bank is thick with tension as the evidence against Margaret Ellison and Edward Langston is laid bare. Dr. Malcolm Carter stands at the head of the table, his presence commanding and unyielding. The security footage, Aaliyah's detailed notes and the incriminating text messages have painted a clear picture of discrimination and corporate espionage. Margaret's face is pale, her hands trembling as she realizes the full extent of her downfall. Edward, once a confident executive, now sits with his shoulders slumped, his eyes darting toward the door as if hoping for an escape. Malcolm addresses the room, his voice calm but resolute. Banking is built on trust, he begins, his words carrying the weight of years of experience. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, regardless of their age, race, or perceived wealth. He gestures toward the security footage still frozen on the screen, showing Aaliyah standing in the corner for hours. What happened today reveals a culture of discrimination that stops now. My daughter was treated this way because of how she looks. How many others have been? How many potential customers walked away feeling unwelcome or unworthy? How many dreams of home ownership or business creation were quietly crushed by biased treatment? Margaret, seeing her career and reputation disintegrating, makes one final attempt at self-preservation. "I'm sorry, sir, it won't happen again," she insists, her voice thin and desperate. "I was only following protocols." Lydia Harper, the regional director, who has remained silent throughout most of the proceedings, finally speaks, her tone icy. "By holding a minor against her will for hours?" she asks. "That's your understanding of protocol?" Malcolm adds, his voice cutting through the room. "By selling confidential information to competitors? Is that also standard protocol at Pinnacle Trust Bank?" Margaret has no answer, her excuses crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Lydia stands, addressing Margaret directly. "You're fired immediately pending potential criminal charges," she says, nodding to security. "Please escort Miss Ellison from the building and ensure she surrenders all company property before leaving." The security guard who once enforced Margaret's cruelty now takes her arm, leading her out of the room. Margaret casts one final glance back at the conference room, at the authority she wielded so cruelly just hours before, at the young girl whose treatment exposed everything, and at the powerful man she unwittingly crossed. Her face shows a mix of remorse and shock as the glass doors close behind her. Edward Langston faces a similar fate. "Mr. Langston, you will be turned over to the authorities for corporate espionage," Malcolm says, his voice unwavering. "Your actions have not only violated ethical standards but also broken federal laws." Edward tries to protest, but security escorts him out as well, his once confident stride replaced by the cautious gait of a man facing serious consequences. Later that evening, news reports will show Edward walking into a federal courthouse. A CNN headline scrolling beneath. "Former banking executive faces corporate espionage charges." The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has already expanded their investigation, uncovering a pattern of corporate theft that spans years. Back at Pinnacle Trust Bank, the focus shifts to reform. Malcolm gathers the bank's employees in the main auditorium for an unprecedented announcement. "Today, Pinnacle Trust Bank failed one of our customers in the most fundamental way," he begins, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "This failure wasn't just an isolated incident, it was symptomatic of systemic issues that we must address immediately and comprehensively." He gestures to Aaliyah, who stands beside him, her small figure a powerful symbol of resilience. "What happened to my daughter today wasn't just wrong because she's my daughter. It would have been equally wrong if she were a teacher, a doctor, or a student travelling home." Malcolm announces a company-wide initiative to transform the bank's culture. Every single employee of Pinnacle Trust Bank will undergo comprehensive bias training before returning to service, he says. This training program, developed by my team of behavioral psychologists and diversity experts, will become a permanent part of our onboarding and continuing education. Murmurs spread through the crowd as employees recognize the magnitude of what's being announced, a program that will cost millions and disrupt operations significantly. Starting tomorrow, Malcolm continues, Pinnacle Trust Bank will implement a company-wide grounding for mandatory training. Every service will be suspended for 48 hours while our entire staff participates in the first phase of this program. The gasps are audible throughout the auditorium. In an industry where minutes of delay cost thousands, a 48-hour shutdown is unprecedented, but the message it sends about the bank's commitment to change is priceless. Malcolm also announces new policies: zero tolerance for discrimination, transparent complaint procedures, and protections for employees who report misconduct. The employee handbook is rewritten to explicitly state that accepting payments from customers in exchange for preferential treatment is grounds for immediate termination. One person in the branch is singled out for praise. Sophie and Nguyen showed true integrity today, Malcolm says, gesturing to the young teller who risked her job to help Aaliyah. She chose basic human decency over blind obedience to corrupt leadership. That's the kind of character this institution should value. Sophie, who had been standing nervously at the back of the room, is brought forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. Malcolm announces her promotion to Customer Experience Manager, a role where she'll help lead the bank's transformation. Sophie's face lights up with a mix of gratitude and determination. She knows this is her chance to make a real difference. In the weeks that follow, Pinnacle Trust Bank undergoes a comprehensive transformation. Conference rooms are converted into training centers and flight schedules are modified to ensure every employee, from tellers to executives, participates in the mandatory program. The training isn't the standard corporate checkbox exercise employees are used to ignoring. It's immersive, challenging, and at times uncomfortable, confronting employees with their own biases through simulations and discussions. Malcolm makes a point of personally addressing many of these sessions, standing before rooms filled with skeptical employees. This is your opportunity to be part of the solution, he tells them. What happened to my daughter happens to people without her resources every day. Today we begin changing that. Outside the bank's corporate bubble, consequences continue to unfold. Margaret Ellison discovers that in the digital age, accountability follows you everywhere. Her name and face become synonymous with discrimination, and her attempts to find new employment are met with rejection after rejection. During one interview that initially seemed promising, the hiring manager's expression changes the moment recognition dawns. "You're the manager from that discrimination incident, aren't you?" The interview ends shortly after. Edward Langston fares even worse. His distinguished career is reduced to a single moment of greed, and Summit Financial faces a PR crisis as clients pull their accounts in droves. For Aaliyah, the experience has been transformative. She's no longer just a 13-year-old girl who was humiliated in a bank. She's a catalyst for change, a voice for those who have been silenced by systemic bias, and her journey is far from over. Aaliyah stands on a stage at Evergreen Academy, addressing a crowd of students, her voice confident and clear. 3 months after the incident that shook Pinnacle Trust Bank to its core, Aaliyah Carter stands on a stage at Evergreen Academy, her small figure radiating a quiet confidence. The auditorium is buzzing with energy as students from schools across the district fill the seats, their eyes fixed on the 13-year-old girl at the podium. Aaliyah is no longer the humiliated girl forced to stand in a corner. She's a poised young woman with purpose in her eyes, leading a new initiative that's already making waves. Financial knowledge isn't just for adults or the wealthy, Aaliyah says, her voice carrying through the room as she clicks to the next slide in her presentation. It's power, and everyone deserves access to that power regardless of your age, background, or how much money your family has. The screen behind her displays a logo, Teen Financial Empowerment Program, an initiative Aaliyah helped create with her father's foundation. The program aims to teach young people about managing money, opening bank accounts, and understanding their rights as consumers, skills Aaliyah now knows are essential for building a more equitable future. Aaliyah shares her story with the audience, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "A few months ago, I walked into a bank to deposit a scholarship check I'd earned, she says. But instead of being treated like any other customer, I was humiliated, forced to stand in a corner for hours and called a fraud just because of how I looked. The crowd murmurs, some students shaking their heads in disbelief. I was scared, Aaliyah admits. But I knew I had to do something, so I wrote down everything I saw, the way they treated me, the way they treated other people who didn't look like their ideal customers, and the bigger plan they were hiding to hurt the bank my dad had just bought. She pauses, letting her words sink in. That day taught me something important, she continues. We all have the power to stand up against injustice, even when it feels like the odds are against us. I turned a terrible experience into something positive, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt like they don't belong. The audience erupts into applause, and Aaliyah smiles, a mix of pride and humility on her face. She's become the face of the Teen Financial Empowerment Program, traveling to schools across the city to share her story and teach other kids how to take control of their financial futures. In the front row, Dr. Malcolm Carter watches his daughter with a proud smile. He's dressed in a simple suit, his presence understated but powerful. After the presentation, father and daughter head to a nearby ice cream shop, a small tradition they've kept since Aaliyah was little. They sit across from each other, each with an elaborate sundae in front of them, the autumn light casting a warm glow through the window. Aaliyah stirs her ice cream thoughtfully, her mind still on the events of the past few months. I keep thinking about that day at the bank, she says, her voice soft. I was so scared standing in that corner, but something told me to keep watching, to keep writing everything down. Malcolm nods, his eyes filled with pride. You turned a terrible experience into positive change, he says. Your documentation didn't just address what happened to you. It exposed systemic problems that affected countless others. I'm so proud of you, Aaliyah. She smiles, a small blush creeping up her cheeks. I never expected to become the face of a financial literacy program, she says with a laugh. I just wanted to deposit my check and go home. Malcolm chuckles, but his expression turns serious. The best leaders emerge from the trenches, not from the sidelines, he says. You experienced the problem firsthand. That gives your solutions authenticity. Aaliyah nods, taking in her dad's words. She knows he's right. Her experience at Pinnacle Trust Bank gave her a unique perspective, one that's now helping other kids like her. But the truth is both simpler and more profound than that. Aaliyah's journey isn't just about financial literacy or even justice. It's about recognizing that every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of who they are or who their family might be. And she's determined to keep fighting for that principle, one presentation, one student, one story at a time. 6 months after the incident that nearly destroyed Pinnacle Trust Bank, the company is not just surviving, it's thriving. The bank's transformation has become a model for the industry, with passenger numbers increasing by 12% and employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. The toxic culture that festered beneath the surface for years has been exposed to the light and is finally healing. Conference rooms that once hosted Margaret Ellison's discriminatory decisions are now training centers where employees learn to confront their biases and treat every customer with respect. Independent auditors confirm what customers have already noticed. For the first time, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern clients report service experiences equal to or better than those of white clients, a metric that should have been standard but had never been achieved in the industry. Aaliyah Carter's story has spread far beyond Seattle, inspiring people across the country to stand up against injustice and demand change. Her Teen Financial Empowerment Program has reached thousands of students, giving them the tools to take control of their financial futures and the confidence to speak out when they're treated unfairly. Aaliyah has become a symbol of resilience and hope, proof that even a 13-year-old girl can change the world when she refuses to be silenced. The real lesson of Aaliyah's story isn't about the consequences of mistreating someone powerful. It's about recognizing that every person deserves to be treated with the same respect, regardless of who their father might be. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about progress, about creating a world where everyone has a fair shot at their dreams. Aaliyah's experience at Pinnacle Trust Bank wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning of a movement, one that's changing lives one story at a time. If Aaliyah's story inspired you, if you believe in justice and the power of standing up for what's right, then hit that like button, Subscribe to our channel and share this video with everyone you know. Type justice in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. Together we can build a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.